Hi, I'm Jeremy Searier. Welcome to Module 2 of CRE Invested. This is about defining your strategy and your why, particularly trying to get a handle on what exactly you're looking for in the market. When you're going out to source a deal, one of the things that's really tempting is to bypass looking at your strategy and focusing on your tactics instead. We go back to the ancient Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, who once said, "All men can see tactics, whereby I conquer. But what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved." Now, really what this means is when you're defining your strategy, you want to look at what the overall big picture of what you're trying to accomplish is. If you don't understand that, then the tactics that you implement are really going to be meaningless. So our agenda for this module will be to talk about formulating your strategy. We'll be getting to the tactics in later modules that will actually support your strategy and help you with sourcing your deal flow. We're going to talk about developing your why, and really why that's so integral to moving your strategy forward so that you can create an abundant source of deal flow for yourself. We're going to discuss target types. We're going to break them down into 4 different categories: geography, industry, asset, and problem. And ultimately, we're going to lock on to your specific target and talk about what you are trying to accomplish for yourself. The very first thing, though, when we talk about tactics is thinking about a puzzle. If you've ever taken a puzzle and tried to put it together, you start with a box. And in that box, you might have a few hundred or 1,000 pieces of that puzzle. You dump all the pieces out, but unless you know the picture of what you're trying to put together first, it's really hard to find a way to fit those pieces together into a meaningful image. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is, instead of dumping the puzzle pieces out and focusing on all those tips and tricks and little tactics that you can implement to maybe make the phone ring or get a motivated seller to call you, is we're actually going to talk about the why in your strategy. And the reason we're going to do that is because the tips and tricks you may be using or have heard other people talk about, they might be meaningless to you because they may not actually be the type of deal that you're looking for. The other problem with those tips and tricks is that you may actually find that implementing them can be costly, time-consuming, and you don't even know if they're going to work for you. So in Module 2, what we'll do is we'll move away from the tactics. They're seductive. They're going to try to trick you into spending your time on things that don't really work. And instead of dumping the puzzle pieces out and just digging in and starting to try to put the puzzle together, you're actually going to take a step back, look at the picture of what you're trying to accomplish first, define the strategy, and then start to identify the tactics, those individual pieces that you'll need to put into place in order to make that picture come to life. So we're first going to ask a question, and what I want you to ask yourself is this: why do you want to invest in commercial real estate? Why do you want to invest in commercial real estate? It's a very important question. So here are a couple examples of people who have answered these questions. Alan answered the question by saying, "My father is aging and has no long-term disability insurance. I believe that building a commercial real estate portfolio will fund his increasing medical and assisted living needs." Randy answered the question by saying, "My daughter just turned 8. In 10 years, she'll be heading off to college. I believe that investing in commercial real estate today will provide her with the college education she deserves, fund her first home purchase, and pay for her wedding." Ramona also chimed in and said, "I work 80 to 100 hours per week, and I don't have time to spend with my family. My children are growing up, and I feel like I'm missing out on once-in-a-lifetime moments. I don't know how long I can go on like this. I believe that achieving financial independence with commercial real estate investing will enable me to enjoy more free time as well as a meaningful life, relationships, and experiences." So what we're hearing from these 3 people are the motivations behind why they want to invest in commercial real estate. They're all trying to bring a meaningful benefit to their individual situations, whether it's taking care of family, spending more time with loved ones, or preparing for the future. Those whys are integral for figuring out why you're going to go through this process to source deals for yourself. So the very first exercise we're going to do is we're going to stop for a moment, go into exercise 2.1 and develop your specific why. So now that you've finished exercise 2.1, you're starting to see what your core motivations may be for building the strategy. One of the things that I want to emphasize to you is that it's common to fear limiting yourself and maybe missing an opportunity. If you've ever gone out in the market and you started looking for deals, one of the things you want to do is cast a wide net. You don't want to miss anything. You don't want to go out and say, well, that looks like a great opportunity, but it's really not what I'm looking for right now. This is one of the biggest mistakes that investors make. What they tend to do is they look at too broad a spectrum and they see too many different options, or maybe not enough options because they don't exactly know what they're looking for. So here's the bad news. I'm going to ask you to limit yourself in defining your strategy. And when you limit yourself, what you're going to find is you are going to miss some deals. I'll guarantee it. But the good news is that you're going to see opportunities that fit with your strategy and your why. You want to find deals that make sense for you. You want to find deals that support your strategy. You want to find deals that support why you want to buy commercial real estate and invest in it and buy more of it. If you have that parameter preset, you're going to find that the opportunities that you do identify, that you do find, are going to fall right in line with what you're trying to accomplish. All the other stuff will be garbage. It's not going to fit what you want. You can get rid of it. Don't waste your time with it. So let's talk about selecting your target and identifying exactly what you're looking for. You want to find properties really that tenants like, right? So you've got 4 different ways to approach this situation. You want to find owners that are looking to sell their properties. So you can start with one category, which is owners that are in a specific geography. Or you can go into an industry vertical. I like companies that occupy certain types of property, or maybe companies that own and occupy certain types of property. You can go into asset type, office, retail, industrial, multifamily, hotel, motel, hospitality, self-storage. Or you can go after a specific problem in the market. So let's talk about geography first. When you're defining your target by a geographical market, what you want to do is you want to choose an area that's manageable. And by manageable, I mean it's an area that you can get access to. Perhaps you can canvass it over a 5-week period. You can drive or fly to it regularly. It could be comprised of a zip code or a town, or it might even be a market area. You may choose a main commercial corridor where there's a lot of retail and office property. That's your favorite area to invest in, so you want to identify that market area. It could be a 4x4 square mile area. That could be a market where you've gone in and said, I'd like to focus on buildings within this square, and I'm only going to focus on buildings in this square because this is the market that I like most. It's the market I'm most comfortable with. It's the market I think that is going to appreciate in value over time, and I see an increase in demand coming into this area. By defining a geography, what you'll be able to do for yourself is to set limits. And when you set limits, as I just said, you can start to get rid of the time-wasting activities, tips and tricks and tactics that you're hearing out there. Just throw all that stuff to the wayside and focus on exactly where you want to be. Another option you have is to go by industry vertical. So what is this exactly? Well, industry verticals are categories that are built up around specific types of companies. So for example, you can have verticals that are around renewable energy, biotech, telecom, financial services, pharmaceutical, healthcare, government, education. There are any number of different verticals you can focus on. An example of this would be looking at REITs. So oftentimes you'll see REITs that are focused specifically in an industry. Healthcare is one of them. You'll find REITs that only go out and invest in healthcare properties. Some of those are public, some are private. The public ones you can buy shares in if you'd like to. So when you're focusing on an industry vertical, one of the things you want to look for are trends, and you want to look for expansion. You want to know where companies are and what they're up to in those specific areas. Some of the largest sectors in the U.S. right now are construction, professional, scientific, and technical services, as well as other services. This kind of information is available to you at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can go to that website and you can see, based on different parts of the country, which businesses are more active than others. Some of my favorite right now are medical, healthcare, utilities, so energy, and the education sector. Those three sectors are very hot. I see growth going on in those areas. There is some consolidation happening right now in the healthcare space, so you want to keep an eye on that and how that's going to shape up. But when you're focusing on these industries, look for growth. The last thing you want to do is get into some real estate that's occupied by companies that are downsizing or going out of business. The third target that you can choose from is an asset type. This is the most common approach that investors take. They focus on a specific type of property. You'll find you can focus on office buildings. It could be Class A, B, or C buildings. You can focus on retail properties. It could be strip centers, power centers, net leased assets. Industrial properties, you can go into flex, R&D, distribution, warehouse. You can also go to multifamily. Multifamily could be made up of senior housing, low-income housing, that's Section 8. You might find assisted living, all different types of categories within that residential sector, and land as well as an option. When you focus in on a specific asset type, what that allows you to do is become an expert in how those properties are owned and operated. Now, each one comes with some pros and cons, so let's talk about those. The office sector has some pros. The pros are that you get 3 to 5 year leases. The lease structures can be beneficial in the sense that you have long-term commitments for the space that you own. You have a professional tenant base. It can be nice to work with professionals as tenants versus maybe a resident who's living in a unit and likes to call you to complain at all hours of the night about an issue they may have. You'll also find that in the office sector, employment drives demand for space. So as you see the job market pick up in a specific area, specific market, in a specific industry, you can start to project the amount of demand that that's going to create for new office space. The management on office isn't too bad. I would rate it as sort of a medium, or on a scale of 1 to 10, a 5. It's not terribly complicated or difficult. It's just the kind of thing where professional tenants expect to receive services. So when they call you to take care of a problem, they want you to be responsive and deal with it, or for your management company to take care of it. Some of the downsides on the office asset type: you have prolonged vacancy periods. I can't tell you how many times you're going to run into a vacancy period on an office building that you didn't expect to go as long as it did. You got to plan for that. It can take 6, 12, 18, 24 months sometimes to fill an office space. So that's something to be careful of. You also need to budget for tenant improvement allowances. It's rare to find an office user who's going to come into a building and they're just going to lay out some money to upfit their space. One of the things I like to equate this to is when you go to the car dealership to lease a car, you might lease it for 3 years. The dealer may offer you some incentives, so they may say, hey, come on in, we're going to give you $500 or $1,000 back, or we're going to give you a great rate on the lease. No money down, or maybe a little bit of money down for recording and that type of thing, taxes, title, insurance. But you get to drive the car off the lot, and it's a low-cost lease. Now, for the dealer, it's a great deal because they move that supply off their lot. You're now paying for the depreciation on the car. They get the car back, and they're going to resell it, so they still own it. Office space is kind of similar to that, but the one thing that you need to keep in mind is that if you're going out to lease a car, the last thing you're going to do is take it down the street to an auto shop and get it all tricked out. You're not going to have special rims put on it, have it pinstriped or whatever, or souping up the engine, because you don't own it. Well, office tenants are kind of like that. They don't want to come in and necessarily spend their own money to improve your property. So they'll ask you to do it for them. Now, what you're going to find on the tenant improvement allowance side of the world is that second generation space, it's going to cost, probably need a budget between $5 and $10 a square foot for paint and carpet in order to get that space up to snuff for the tenant that's coming in. If you're doing new development, you're going to find it's going to run from $25 to $45 a square foot. So a lot of times in your cash flow analysis, it's easy to forget about that improvement allowance factor, but you got to put that in there, because in office space you are going to have to go back in and probably spend some money on that property after you've bought it. So the other thing that you can run into is tenant renegotiations, where tenants actually come out and say to you, I know we have a lease for 5 more years, but we'd like you to lower our rate. And that can happen, so that's something you want to be careful of. You can also see unemployment factoring a reduction in demand. Office tends to be a pretty competitive space supply-wise, so you want to watch out for who the other office building owners are in your market and make sure that they're not beating you up on pricing. There's also a trend in the office market for home officing. A friend of mine who works at PricewaterhouseCoopers in their real estate department was just telling me that nationally they've recently reduced their footprint by 900,000 square feet. So we are seeing a consolidation in the office market where tenants are trying to optimize the space they have, and if they can put people out to virtual office situations, they're doing that. So that's something else you want to keep in mind. Other cons on office space: broker commissions can be high on leasing, and you're tied to the rental appreciation cycle. So what this means on the rental appreciation cycle is that as office space increases in cost or rents go up, you're going to find that there's a great equity multiple on your value. But as the rental market softens and rates go down, you can get hurt there. So unless you're buying and selling at the right times in that market cycle and getting in and out of the office market, you could find that you're going to get trapped there and you might get hurt. Or you could make a lot of money, but oftentimes I see people going in and out at the wrong times on the office cycle. So that's something you want to keep an eye on. Retail space. When you're investing in retail, there are some pros. I love net lease structures. You've got triple net leases. This means that you're able to bill the tenant for those triple net charges. You can pass through your common area maintenance, real estate taxes. These are all those operating expenses. They go back to the tenant as additional rent. The tenant's going to pay you that money back as part of their right for using the property. Most retailers will also come in and build out their own space. They'll sign a lease, they'll bring their own money, and they'll have their own special upfit for their stores. So that's something that you don't necessarily have to write a check for, but beware, they will ask you for free rent while they're doing that. Other pros on retail: I like the 3 to 20 year lease structure. You can get a long-term tenant. You buy a Walgreens, for example, and a lot of those leases start at 25 years. So you're locking a tenant in for a long period of time. Other retail uses don't like to leave a location once they have control of it. Retail tends to be well located for reuse. So that means that if a tenant goes out, it's oftentimes easy to find a new one. And management tends to be pretty easy because you do have these net lease structures. As long as you're taking care of the property, keeping it clean, presentable, retailers are actually pretty good tenants. Some of the cons on retail: retail can often be overbuilt, where you're going to find that it's easy to go down the street and for a developer to add new supply. If you go to certain parts of the country, like Florida, for example, you'll drive around and see a lot of dark stores or empty spaces. What this means is that tenants don't need it, and you've got owners that are sitting there and they just don't have enough demand in the market to convert that supply into leasable space. So you want to watch out for that. If you're investing in retail in a market area where you have a lot of opportunity for new development, just be careful, watch out, keep an eye on the pipeline and what's coming, make sure that you don't get washed out or diluted by oversupply. Tenant build-outs are often not reusable. So the question I would ask you is, when was the last time you saw a Dunkin' Donuts go into an old Starbucks and reuse what Starbucks had? They're not going to do that. What they'll do is they'll demo the store and they'll put in their own branded build-out. Retailers can go dark, so they may actually leave a center that you own, go out of business in that location, but continue to pay your rent. And when that happens, it can hurt your other tenants in that plaza. They may actually complain, and it could trigger some lease obligations that you don't want to deal with on that dark space because of the decline in customer flow to that location. So you want to watch out for dark provisions in your leases when you're buying these properties. Another con on retail, you can have prolonged vacancy. Unless you're in a very, 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 very A-plus location, you're going to find that these stores tend to take a little bit of time to release. You may sit on an empty space for a year before you start seeing rent generated from it again. So when you buy these properties, beware of that and budget for it. You don't want to get into a situation where you're having to come out of pocket to carry a building until you find the right tenant to take the space. The other thing on retail is that the rental appreciation is cyclical. Similar to office, rents go up and down, and as they do, you want to be entering and exiting that asset type, that retail asset, at the best times. And that is when you see rent starting to build and you actually have long-term leases with increases in the rental rates. You can then turn around and sell that property for a lot more money than you bought it for. Industrial. This is a great asset type if you're able to follow some of these key pro components of it. You get long-term leases. Industrial tenants tend to be pretty easy to manage. They're typically a hands-on type company, so when they occupy your building, they're used to solving problems on their own. Management's pretty easy. They have net lease structures as well. So industrial can be great there. Now, a couple of the issues that you'll run into, you can have environmental hazards. You want to watch out for contaminated property, and you want to watch out for tenants that deal with hazardous materials. So make sure you do your environmental due diligence if you're going in to focus on industrial. Industrial also has a low barrier to entry, and what I mean by that is that a lot of markets have plenty of land, and when you have plenty of land at low cost, it can be fairly affordable to just put up another industrial building and add supply to a marketplace. So you want to watch out for that. Overbuilding of industrial can be a bad thing. If you're focused on industrial, try to focus on markets that are tighter, where it's more difficult to add industrial space because land prices have gone up to a point where developers can't add new industrial buildings on the land that they have to buy at construction costs today because the rents won't support the deals. So if you're focused on industrial, watch for those opportunities. Other cons in industrial, you're going to have prolonged vacancy periods. It can take time to fill these buildings. They're also prone to functional obsolescence. And what that means is most tenants today are looking for smaller, high bay warehouse style industrial buildings. They want 24-foot clear height. It allows them to get in and go vertical with their use of the space. A lot of older industrial buildings have these 11 to 14 foot, maybe 18-foot clear height. When you get into those spaces, they're not as functional for a tenant, and a tenant's going to favor the buildings with the higher ceilings. So you can start to see some functional obsolescence there. The other thing you can run into is access. Tailboard loading docks and drive-in doors are very, very important to these buildings. And if you get a building where you only have one door that's in the far corner, you can have an access problem. And it's not an efficient use of the space in the facility for moving the goods and products and inventory around the building to get in and out to the trucks. That can be a problem. But that would also pose an opportunity for you if you were to find a building that did in fact have a limited access point, and you could create more access points. You may actually be able to unlock more value out of that property. And similar to the retail and the office assets, industrial also is a cyclical type of asset. So you will find, and in my experience with industrial, the rates tend to be more flat rather than fluctuate as much as office and retail. That can be a good thing. It can be a good thing because it can hedge you on the downside. It can be a bad thing because you may not see a lot of rent growth and appreciation in the industrial market. Moving into multifamily. Multifamily pros, you have this very basic premise that multifamily solves a problem for all of us. That is that everyone needs a place to live. And you have food, clothing, shelter. Multifamily solves the shelter problem, so that's a good thing. Other pro with multifamily is that it's quick to adjust to market rents. So let's talk about that for a second. In the office, retail, and industrial market, you have these long-term leases that can be fantastic. Problem is, when you come out of one of those, you may be in a different market cycle than you were when that lease was originated. And sometimes that market cycle can actually be one where you see rents declining. That can be a big equity hit for you. But it can also pose a big opportunity for you to buy and then reposition a building with a new long-term lease at the new rates in the market. What's nice about multifamily is that you really have the opportunity every 30 to 60 days, based on tenant turnover, to adjust your market rents. So as rents are going up, you can take advantage of that more quickly, and as rents are going down, you can also hedge yourself and adjust to the market more quickly in order to keep your building full and maintain your cash flow. You have limited vacancy periods in multifamily. As long as you're not in an oversupplied market, you're going to find that your units will tend to rent fairly quickly, in 1 to 2 months, if not faster. You have the opportunity for economy of scale in multifamily. So what this means is that you can have 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 units all focused in one location or under a few rooftops. That can be great because now you have a lot of people paying to use the same resources. Multifamily is also the most understood investment type. It's the easiest to end. It's the easiest because we all we interact with residential real estate on a regular basis. So you'll find that the majority of investors tend to go to multifamily first because it is the simplest. So that could be a great thing for you when you're selling. When you're selling one of these, you're going to find that there's a larger pool of buyers than there will be for office, retail, or industrial. That can be bad because it will be a more competitive market. But you will find that there's a pretty active space there for investment. Some of the downsides on multifamily, you're going to run into lead paint and other health hazards. Tenant trends can turn on you, so if you happen to have a management company that's running one of your properties and they rent to some tenants that are into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, those tenants could just really sour your property and scare some of your best tenants away. So that can happen very quickly. That's less likely to happen in that retail, office, or industrial sector. You have gross lease structures. Now what this means is the tenants are paying you rent, and out of that rent you're paying all the operating expenses for the property. Maybe you're passing through utility costs to the tenant, but ultimately you have to be really careful on operations that your operational expenses don't eat into your gross income. That can really destroy your net cash position and devalue your property. Multifamily can also have high repair and maintenance costs. You have a lot of wear and tear on these properties, so you need to make sure you budget for that and be prepared to spend some money to keep these properties up to snuff. And lastly, management's really hands-on. There are a lot of owners that buy these properties, and you'll find that if you're one of them, it's easy to get burned out owning apartment buildings. So it's important that you do find a management company and rely on them to go ahead and manage that asset for you and provide a buffer between you and the tenant base so that you're not burning out and getting caught up in all the little things that so often come with renting these apartment buildings out. If you're interested in land, pros on land are that management's pretty easy. You really don't have much to take care of there. They're net lease structures, so you can actually lease the land out, which is great. You'll often find banks or restaurants on very highly desirable land parcels. They'll actually go out and pay rent just to use your land. And land also offers you the opportunity to develop with market expansion. Downsides on land. Environmental liability. Believe it or not, if you own raw land, you need to keep an eye on it because there are people that will go out and use it or dump on it or cut your trees. They will take advantage of your land because they'll think no one's watching. So you want to watch out for that. The other thing on land is if you don't have anyone using it, you're still paying real estate taxes and you might be paying some liability insurance. So it could actually be a liability for you while you own it and you're sitting there waiting for an opportunity to monetize that land. Land can be slow to appreciate. It can also be affected by building demand and cost to build. So you want to watch out on land in one sense here. If you're buying land and the cost to build and cost of construction goes up, be careful, because that can actually devalue your land. And the one thing you want to watch for is oil prices go up more over time. Construction materials cost more. And when they cost more, a developer can't necessarily come in and build a building to fit a market rent unless they're paying less for the land. So you will find that you could be susceptible value-wise to fluctuations in land if you're seeing construction costs and cost to build changing as well. The last piece here on your target is identifying whether you want to focus on a specific problem. Now, here's one of the things I like to say. You may be in the real estate business, but ultimately you're in the people who own real estate business. And what that means is that the real estate itself may not have a specific problem. In fact, the real estate may be fine. It's the people who own the real estate who might actually have the problem. Some of these problems come in the form of many things. You can have high vacancy rates. To the owner of the property, that means he's got a cash flow problem. You could have a 1031 exchange need. The owner is afraid of selling the property because they don't want to pay capital gains. They could have a tax planning problem. The IRS may have an assessment out and they've got to settle that with the IRS, so they've got to sell the property. Accelerated disposition, they need liquidity. And liquidity could mean anything from a foreclosure that's looming to medical problems, and they can't take care of the property and they need the money to take care of an issue they're having. A divorce that might be a forced sale by court order. You could have a death. You know, the family member maybe that was managing the property has died, and the other family members don't know what to do with the property and they need to get rid of it. You could have tenant renegotiation problems. Tenants coming back and saying, we want to pay lower rent. That could put the owner into a cash crunch. They need to get out of the property. Sale leaseback opportunities. Companies oftentimes need liquidity, and if they own their real estate, one of the things they look to do is monetize the equity they have by selling the property, signing a long-term lease, and then taking that money and reinvesting it in their business. You could see unemployment. That could be affecting an industry. Layoffs are occurring and the owners of those properties need cash. Those companies need cash. Or you see environmental contamination. You'll see in specific markets, you might see an old gas station that's closed down. It had some leakage, but you might have a great retailer that would go on that location, and the owner doesn't have the money to solve the environmental problem, so you come in, you solve the problem, you put the retailer on the property. So there are a lot of problems you can focus on, and if you choose to focus on a couple of these problems or just one of them, you can really dig pretty deeply into a market and get to people in a meaningful way. And when you do that, you're going to find they're responsive and they're going to want to make a deal with you. Another problem people run into is this financing problem. And you've heard a lot about banks and term loans and CMBS and maturities, that type of thing. Here's a little trick. When an owner buys a building or they refinance a property, they get a term loan. And what that means is that they have 5, 7, 10 years to pay that loan off. It balloons. When that's going to happen, they usually, about 12 months before it's going to occur, they start getting worried about what their plan is. So what you can do is you can follow the 469 rule. The 469 rule is you identify owners that refinanced or bought 5, 7, 10 years ago, and you start contacting them at years 4, 6, and 9. That's the period of time when these people are most likely to look at either refinancing their property to keep it or selling it. And if you're there to have the opportunity to talk to them about selling the property, you may be solving a looming problem for them. Where can you go to find that kind of information? Well, there are a lot of resources. Many of them are free, some are paid. And I'm going to go through the list here with you really quickly. You can go to the registry or county deeds office. That's a great location. The assessor or tax records database for a county or a local municipality is a fantastic source of this information. You can go to title companies and ask them for a database of owners of specific retail properties or specific industrial properties in a market area. Info USA, Dun & Bradstreet, ZoomInfo. These are all business databases that have information about companies and industry verticals that you may be interested in marketing to. You can go to DataQuick. Real estate trade journals are a great resource. Prospect Now is a really good one. They're a paid subscription service, but what I like about Prospect Now is they combine tax assessor information with business lists from Info USA. And then what they do is they go in and they actually do phone number lookups for you. So when you're looking at LLCs, corporations, trusts, the people at Prospect Now go in and they research who the officers are and who the most likely contact name is for that organization, and they give you the phone number. Awesome tool, awesome resource. You should check it out. It's a very, very useful tool. And one other thing that they offer for you now is they actually have an own versus rent feature on their filter. So if you're interested in sale-leaseback opportunities, you can search property types in a geography and industry vertical and find the companies that actually own the real estate they're in, and then market specifically to them to see if they want to sell their buildings and then lease them back over a long period of time. Some other data resources you can go to are Merlin Data. Industry trade journals are a great resource. If you're interested in high-tech companies, you can go and look up high-tech trade journals. There's a lot of information in there about who's expanding, contracting, who just secured venture capital money, new contracts that were awarded, who's consolidating or being acquired. LinkedIn is a phenomenal resource as well. If you're not on LinkedIn, go on there, join some groups that are specific to the asset type, the industry, or the geography that you might be interested in. And you can just go to real estate listing services. They often have those data sources that you can go into and run searches and pull data down to see what kind of activity is going on in a market. So let's move into exercise 2.2. What I'd like you to do is go in and focus on this exercise, and what this is focused on doing is getting you to a point where you can lock on to your specific target market. So now that you've completed exercise 2.2, you're starting to see that you're formulating your strategy and your why. Your statement might start to resemble something like this. I believe that spending time with my daughter is priceless because she will only grow up once, and because I want to generate enough passive income so I can choose how much time I spend with her. I will make this happen by focusing my attention on multi-tenant office buildings in Sullivan County, Tennessee. These produce $100,000 in annual cash flows, and I will do this until I have at least 3 in my portfolio. I will own 3 buildings that produce $300,000 a year in positive cash flow. So as you formulate your strategy and your why, it will start to look something like that. The next session, we're going to move you away from the qualitative motivations in your actual target to the financial targets that you need to hit to make this work for you. So here's what we're going to cover in Module 3. We're going to talk about financial targeting. And within financial targeting, we'll look at measures of investment. Those measures are going to be comprised of the following: gross rent multipliers, cap rates, cash-on-cash returns, annualized returns, and the internal rate of return. And once you go through each of these steps in Module 3, you'll then be able to couple or marry those financial targets with your strategy and your why. And when those two come together, you're going to have a very clear picture of what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, where it is, and what it needs to do for you financially in order to qualify as a deal. So thank you. This is the end of Module 2, and I'll see you in Module 3.